Judge Grayson believed he was dealing with just another confused teenager until the young man began tearing apart the prosecution's case with the skill of an experienced attorney. The atmosphere within the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt heavy, almost stifling. Packed rows of onlookers filled the seating area, whispering amongst themselves as they witnessed the drama playing out before them. The defense table appeared oversized for the young man positioned next to it, hands tucked in his pockets, head held high enough to demonstrate his fearlessness. Jalen Dawson, 19 years old, faced charges of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The accusations were severe, but the manner in which Judge Walter Grayson regarded him revealed that the real judgment had little connection to legal matters. Grayson settled back in his seat, fingers tapping carelessly against the smooth surface of his bench. He gazed down at Jalen through his spectacles, his mouth forming something halfway between a grin and a contemptuous expression. "You believe you're some sort of legal scholar?" His voice held a sardonic amusement. "This isn't a university debate, son." Several soft laughs echoed throughout the courtroom. The bailiff, the court reporter, even the prosecutor were all part of the mockery. Jalen remained unmoved. He wasn't finding anything funny. He had invested years getting ready for this very situation, though not precisely this scenario. He never intended to find himself here as an accused person, but he understood the legal arena as well as he knew his own palm. While other teenagers memorized sports statistics, he committed legal precedents to memory. While his peers engaged in gaming, he conducted imaginary trials in his mind, debating fictional cases with himself. His mother, Denise Dawson, had served as a paralegal for more than 2 decades, and Jalen had matured hearing the accounts she shared from work. How district attorneys took shortcuts, how judges showed favoritism, how certain defense lawyers barely made an effort. He soaked up every detail. By age 14, he could analyze a trial more effectively than most graduate law students. However, none of this impressed Grayson. In his view, Jalen was simply another troubled youth. "Let's wrap this up quickly," the judge sighed, opening the case folder. "I've got a tea time at 2. The audience chuckled once more, but this time something changed. Jalen's mouth curved into a slight, barely noticeable smile, because Grayson had just committed his initial error, though the courtroom hadn't realized it yet. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood from his position with the demeanor of someone who had already secured victory. His clothing was immaculate, his necktie perfectly arranged, and his voice carried that practiced assurance of someone who had given the identical presentation countless times previously. "Your Honor, the state will demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was discovered in possession of a stolen automobile, a 2022 Audi A6, reported as missing just hours prior to his apprehension. Officers chased him through the downtown area, where he allegedly tried to escape before being captured. His fingerprints were discovered on the vehicle's steering wheel. The prosecution contends that the evidence is self-explanatory." The statement carried significant impact. The crowd in the gallery moved restlessly, murmuring among themselves. At first glance, it appeared damaging. A stolen automobile, a pursuit, fleeing. Judge Grayson looked at Jalen over his glasses, then returned his attention to Carrington. "Continue." The prosecutor moved toward the jury area, his polished footwear clicking against the flooring. "The defense might attempt to persuade you that this was merely a misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson is some unfortunate casualty of circumstances." He pivoted, making direct eye contact with Jalen for the first time. "But let's be realistic. What kind of victim flees from law enforcement?" The atmosphere in the room grew more intense. Judge Grayson leaned forward, supporting his chin with his hand. Jalen didn't even blink. Carrington went on, sorting through a pile of documents. "Your Honor, I present the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who directly observed the defendant operating the vehicle before he tried to escape. The automobile was verified as stolen. The arrest followed proper procedure." Grayson breathed out through his nostrils, nodding. Seems clear-cut to me. And for most people present, it likely appeared that way. The case seemed obvious. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Jalen had devoted too many years studying legal proceedings not to notice the weaknesses. Still, he remained quiet, observing, waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel softly. Very well, let's hear what the defense has to say. He addressed Jalen's attorney, a public defender named Lisa Thornton, who had spoken barely a handful of words since entering the courtroom. She rose, shifting uncomfortably. Your Honor, my client. Jalen placed a hand on her forearm, a quiet signal. She paused, then resumed her seat. For the first time, Jalen spoke. I'll be handling my own representation, Your Honor. Complete silence filled the room. Grayson stared at him, clearly entertained. You'll do what? Jalen's voice remained calm and controlled. I'll be defending myself. A buzz of conversation spread through the courtroom. The bailiff's eyebrows rose sharply. Carrington's smirk wavered momentarily before he released a harsh laugh. This ought to be entertaining. But nobody was laughing when Jalen took his initial step forward, because everything was about to transform. The gravity of the courtroom surrounded Jalen as he adjusted his position, his hands remaining in his pockets. He allowed the quiet to extend just a bit longer, enough to create discomfort. Then at last, he spoke. Your Honor, before I proceed, I'd like to verify something with the prosecution. Carrington lifted an eyebrow, folding his arms. Go right ahead. Jalen moved forward slowly. You stated that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally observed me operating the vehicle before my arrest, is that correct? Carrington exhaled sharply, already appearing bored. That's accurate, and that testimony is documented in his report. Naturally, it is. Jalen nodded, then faced Judge Grayson. Your Honor, I request that testimony be excluded as evidence. Grayson squinted at him. Based on what reasoning? Jalen removed his hands from his pockets for the first time and gestured toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz never observed me in that vehicle. In reality, he wasn't even working when the chase started. A trace of bewilderment appeared on Carrington's face. What are you suggesting? Jalen stepped forward again. Your Honor, if the court permits, I'd like to submit a motion to examine Officer Ruiz's GPS records from that evening. If his report claims he witnessed me in the car, then his location data should support that. He paused. But I suspect it won't. Now the whispers in the gallery became more audible. Grayson frowned, looking toward Carrington. Counselor. Carrington cleared his throat, his jaw tensing. That report was completed by a law enforcement officer, Your Honor. Are we seriously going to accept the word of a defendant over a trained professional? Jalen offered a small, almost casual shrug. If the officer was positioned where he claimed, then the GPS information will confirm it. But if he wasn't? He let the sentence fade away. Grayson examined him for an extended moment, then turned to Carrington. Does the prosecution object to verifying the officer's GPS records? Carrington hesitated. The delay was just long enough for the jury to notice, the gallery to notice, and most crucially, the judge to notice. Jalen took a quiet breath. He had spent years observing trials, studying prosecutors and their strategies, the methods they used to manipulate the system. And there was one thing he understood with certainty. If Carrington felt confident about his case, he wouldn't be delaying. Grayson sighed, massaging his temple. Counselor. Carrington finally shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the transformation had already started. For the first time, the courtroom had stopped laughing. The courtroom fell silent, but the tension was deafening. Carrington shuffled his documents, his polished assurance beginning to fracture. Your Honor, while we await the GPS records, The reality remains that the defendant's fingerprints were discovered on the steering wheel of the stolen automobile. Jalen nodded slightly, his expression remaining neutral. That's accurate. He stepped forward. But let's examine that evidence more closely. Grayson raised an eyebrow, motioning for him to proceed. Jalen turned toward the jury, establishing eye contact with each member. The prosecution wants you to believe that discovering my fingerprints in a car proves I stole it. That's the narrative they're presenting. But let's consider this rationally. He took a deep breath, maintaining his calm, controlled tone. Suppose you enter a retail store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, perhaps zip it up, then return it to the rack and leave. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. Would the presence of your fingerprints on it prove you committed the theft? Several jurors looked at each other questioningly. Someone in the gallery whispered something quietly. Jalen didn't allow them time to regroup. The vehicle in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft occurred. I was in that store with 3 friends. And yes, as we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think anything of it. Didn't take the car. Didn't drive it. Didn't steal anything from inside. Just a foolish moment of curiosity. He let that settle for a moment. Then, in a voice that sliced through the silence like a blade, he asked, "Does touching something make you a thief?" Carrington cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, desperately searching for something, anything, to regain his footing. Jalen wasn't done. And while we're discussing this, let's address how that fingerprint analysis was conducted. He turned to Grayson. Your Honor, was the forensic expert from this case called to testify? Grayson blinked, surprised by the question. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly answered, No. Jalen's lips pressed together. So let me understand this correctly. The state is using forensic evidence to attempt to convict me, but they didn't believe it was important to bring the actual expert who processed that evidence. No opportunity for me to cross-examine, inquire about the chain of custody, or question the accuracy of the analysis. Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen nodded as if that was exactly what he expected to hear. Fascinating. Judge Grayson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the expression of a man realizing this case wasn't the simple victory he had anticipated. But Jalen wasn't finished yet, because what he was about to reveal would change everything. Jalen took a deliberate step forward, his voice remaining steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to present as evidence an official statement from the vehicle's owner. Judge Grayson frowned. The owner? Jalen nodded. Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement to police that, for some reason, was never included in the prosecution's documentation. And I believe I understand why. He turned to Carrington. Do you remember what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for a response. Instead, he retrieved a printed transcript from his folder and read it aloud. I left my car running when I went into the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and driven off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Jalen held up the document. That's from the original police report, the same report the prosecution conveniently forgot to mention. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer excluded this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the actual thief, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington stepped forward, scrambling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. But Jalen shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't escalate, but it cut through the courtroom with razor-sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the vehicle was abandoned, walking home after buying snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing connecting me to this case is sloppy police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. The case was falling apart rapidly, and everyone could see it. Jalen turned back to the jury. The real suspect escaped that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general vicinity and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is truly about. Silence. Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything additional? Carrington was rigid, his face reddened. No, Your Honor. Judge Grayson exhaled. He looked at Jalen for a long time, then glanced at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would remain with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. A moment of shocked silence, then pandemonium. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling in their notepads. Jalen didn't move immediately. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone present. Judge Grayson, still gripping his gavel, looked at Jalen with an expression that was hard to read. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Recognition, perhaps even remorse. Jalen met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped but didn't turn around. Grayson hesitated, then finally said, You should consider law school. Jalen smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already heading in that direction. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with voices. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward like weapons. Jalen, did you expect the judge to dismiss the case? What's your next move? How does it feel to outsmart a veteran prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hood over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the circus. This wasn't about demonstrating his intelligence. It was about something much larger. His mother, Denise, was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. For a long moment, she simply observed him. Then finally, she shook her head and exhaled. Boy, you scared me to death. Jalen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a chance, Ma. She stared at him a moment longer, then pulled him into a tight embrace. You always were the stubborn one. The cameras continued flashing, but Jalen wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Across the street, standing beside his car, Judge Grayson watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance had vanished. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to contemplation. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew he'd remember this one, because Jalen had accomplished something most people never could. He made the system examine itself, and for once, it was the first to look away. Here's the lesson we ought to learn. How many other cases had proceeded this way? How many people had been convicted, not because of evidence, but because of prejudice, shortcuts, and a system that prioritized closing cases over discovering the truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about those who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what his next step had to be. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but next time, he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the lawyer. And when that day came, he wouldn't be alone. If this story made you pause even for a moment, then share it. The justice system is founded on laws, but it's operated by people, and people can change, but only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and let's keep this conversation alive, because next time it might not be Jalen, it might be someone you care about.